Hey, partners of commercial fishermen, you know how much I appreciate that you come back every week and listen to our incredible podcast. It is so nice to know that we can all gather together every week and just talk about what's going on in our lives. I mean, there are so many aspects of being a partner of a commercial fisherman that we handle the lifestyle, honestly. You know, we do it in a way so we can allow our fishermen to continue fishing and to keep their heads in the game and to fish safely, because that's what we want. We want safe fishing. We want bountiful fishing. We want to preserve our fisheries for the future. So just being able to chat with y'all and to know that we speak the same language is just like such a freaking gift. And I really hope that you get out of this podcast as much as I do, because this is what it's all about. It's that exchange of energy, that exchange of love. And I love to start this podcast off by telling you how much I love you. And you know that because I do it. I think I've done it every day this year and maybe every episode ever. And if not, this is your reminder. You're amazing. Thank you for being here. And if you're new, welcome to the Partners of Commercial Fishermen podcast. This is our space to talk about all things commercial fishing, lifestyle, whether it's relationships, mental health, advocacy, addiction, finances, family. We go deep because that's what we do here. There's nothing that goes unturned. We can talk about things that maybe we feel like we can't talk about to our friends or family because they might not understand. That's fine. But that's fine because we got our own community, and we are happy to have anybody who is interested in our community too, to see what it's really like for the people behind wild caught seafood. There's so much that goes into it. And part of that is advocacy, as we know. And I have to say, I want to start off by saying, I just want to remind every partner of a commercial fisherman that you are actively advocating for your fishermen or your fishery just by existing, just by loving your fishermen and being an ear and a shoulder for them whenever they need it. You are a huge advocate. Another way that I expressed that we could step that up a little bit if you wanted to was sharing your life with family, friends, or people that you meet when you're out doing your errands, or maybe you're at yoga or an activity that you love to do, adult sports league, or, whatever it is that you love to do. Being able to just share with others what your life is like and what your partner does and how they do it is a huge form of advocacy. And one of my favorite things is that I have an album on my phone of pictures. So when people go, oh, what does that look like? Or what does your husband do? And so I pull up photos. I always recommend having like at least 3 to however many you want. But just to show them, this is what the boat looks like. This is what they catch. This is the conditions that they're in, and blah, blah, blah. And then if people want to ask more, you're like, okay, yeah. Well, our fisheries in the U.S. are very sustainable. It depends on where you are fishing. And I feel that many of the listeners here understand that because we are so highly regulated and we have so many rules, commercial fishing in the United States and other areas can be and are sustainable. Of course, no system is perfect, but we're as close. I'm speaking from the US because that's where I am. We're as close as you could possibly get. And I think that every fisherman out there knows that, and part of the reason that we are is because, and this is what you can tell people as well, it's because of the fish tickets or the trip tickets that they have to report. It's because of the permits. It's due to the seasons, however long the seasons are. It depends on how big the size of their catch that they can bring home. It's also, depending on, also let's talk about how the Coast Guard boards the boats to make sure everything is in order. That's another way. They're constantly regulated. And so these are points that you can share with others so they can be like, oh, you know what? I do feel good about eating wild caught seafood, that amazing, incredible quality seafood that is incomparable to anything else on the market. It just is. I am biased, and also I have taste buds that have been blessed enough to have been able to taste some incredible wild-caught seafood. My favorite ever is sockeye salmon from Bristol Bay. I could eat that every freaking day. I love it, love it, love it. Spiny lobsters in California. Oh, so great. The black cod. First time I ever had black cod, I just had I went to a different place. My mouth, it was just like, what is happening in this experience? I felt my eyes closed. I just needed a moment to myself. Dungeness crab, the blue crabs in Maryland are incomparable. I'm a huge fan of North Carolina shrimp and Carolina shrimp in general. The list goes on. So that is advocacy, sharing your life with others. And, I've also learned that people in our private community, they want to know how to step up their game in advocacy. What can they do more than what they're doing now? Maybe they have the capacity to take that on and they're feeling really passionate about it. And yeah, I hear you. And to be honest with you, I was really intimidated about that point. I said, okay, this is what our community wants. I have absolutely no idea how to do that on the level that they want to do it at. So what do I do? Of course, I'm going to ask people who knows what the heck they're talking about. And that's why today I bring on Ava Schulenberg. She was instantly one of my favorite people as soon as we started chatting on Zoom. She has such a humble, beautiful personality, and she is just so down to earth and extremely intelligent. And it was just so nice to just shoot the shiz with somebody who has been there, who is really open and transparent and really wants the best, not only for her fisheries, but for everyone else to be able to take what she has and use it in any way that is helpful for them. So I am thrilled today to have Ava Schulenberg on the podcast. She is a female fisherman and a leader in many important roles in Santa Barbara fisheries. Yet she also works from Santa Barbara to San Diego for the California Lobster Association due to the geographical span of the fishery. So Southern California is on lock thanks to Ava. I'm giving the mad props. Of course, there's tons of people that are a part of that and a part of her team, but I want to give her a shout out because of all the things that she does. And let me just give you a quick list of the many hats that she wears. She is the executive director of the California Lobster and Trap Fishermen's Association, the assistant director of the Commercial Fishermen of Santa Barbara. She is the manager of the Saturday Fishermen's Market of Santa Barbara. She is a laboratory assistant at California Sea Grant. She is also a deckhand with a variety of boats. And as a cherry on top, she is a stewardess with a yachting company in Santa Barbara called the Santa Barbara Captains. Yes, I need to go take a nap. I'm kidding. Ava is a freaking machine, but she does it in a way that isn't, when I was talking to her, it wasn't like she's overwhelmed by it. She truly loves what she does. She is deeply passionate. And one of my favorite takeaways, there were so many, is that Ava said that she wanted to get back on the boats to be able to really have that understanding of the day-to-day life of a fisherman. She had grown up fishing, but she also, in addition to everything else she's doing, to have that understanding, to get reacquainted with what fishermen are dealing with day to day. She's like, I'm gonna be a deckhand. And she almost deckhand with my husband Chris this season too, and we talk about that later, which is great. My point is, Homegirl knows what she's talking about, and she is a treasure trove of information on how to do it effectively on the local, state, and national level. In this episode, we talk about how to make effective public comments, how to connect with local federal agencies to advocate for fisheries, and her experience as a female fisherman and more. And we also get into grant writing, but I'm going to post that part of the interview next month. So as you continue on your journey of advocacy, or if you're thinking about getting more involved, I hope this interview is helpful, informative, and inspires you in ways to do what you are called to do. Let's dive in. I'm Megan Waldrop, host of the Partners of Commercial Fishermen podcast, an extension of an online community for partners to connect and feel less alone. Our podcast invites fishermen, family, friends, and supporters of the industry to learn, laugh, vent, and hear stories about this incredibly unique way of life. What do you say? Let's dive in. Ava, I've decided you're one of my new favorite people, my newest favorite person, and I'm so happy to have you on the podcast today. Thank you so much for your time. I have listed a long list of your incredible titles that you share, but I want you to, again, tell us if you could. And so could we start at the beginning? What's your full name and where are you from?
Yes, you are very much one of my favorite people as well. And my name is Ava Schulenberg. I'm from Santa Barbara, and I have a few different jobs within the commercial fishing industry, within the maritime industry. I am the executive director of the California Lobster and Trap Fishermen's Association. I am the assistant director of the Commercial Fishermen of Santa Barbara. Both of those organizations are 501c3 nonprofits. I crew on a variety of different boats, but primarily have the most experience with lobster and rock crab. and rockfish. And I work as a stewardess on like private charter boats, which is more of just like a funny side hustle. That's a little bit tangential, obviously, to this industry, but it's good on the water time still. And then I manage our Saturday fisherman's market, which is just our local fisherman's market, similar to a farmer's market, but where you can get fresh seafood straight from the fishermen in the harbor. And I also work for California Sea Grant as a contractor on a variety of different projects. And I feel like I'm forgetting something, but I think that's where I think that's where we're gonna end it. If
That's
there is
so
something else
good.
not coming to mind. So
Yeah. It's understandable. You do more than most people would do in their lifetime just right now. So thank you for everything that you do to support the industry. And, it's so interesting that you're able to not only be in the industry, but you're freaking out there. And we're going to get into that more later. And I want to know,
yeah.
how did you even get involved in commercial fishing? Was this something that your family did, or what sparked your interest?
Yes, great question. I get that question all the time. Just because it is such an obscure job. It's an obscure industry typically, to be in as a young woman, especially. My dad was a commercial fisherman, a lifelong commercial fisherman. He started out as an abalone and urchin diver back in the 70s and was part of that blue water gold rush fleet, which was so iconic and cool. And so luckily I got to grow up in our harbor and on boats and fishing with him. And I knew how to gauge a lobster and how to clean a boat before I knew how to make my own bed and, do things that most normal children were taught to do. So that was instilled in me a love for this industry from a very young age. And I went to college far away. I went to school at Tulane in New Orleans after Santa Barbara High, of course. And after coming back, I worked in the tech industry for a while, realized that that was not at all where my heart was. And I had kept those ties to the fishing industry throughout, that whole time. They've been this through line in my life. And so I just sort of circled back to to this world that I love so much. And luckily, there were opportunities for jobs at the time. And it didn't start with me having this many responsibilities. It's just sort of evolved naturally over time. But I'm really pleased with the way things have worked out because it does feel like I chose an industry and not a job. And luckily, that industry is really like close to my heart. So I feel grateful that I get to do what I do. It sounds like a crazy amount of responsibilities, but I genuinely love it.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
That's so cool. I wanted to jump back on what you said about what you said, something about the blue something
Oh,
gold rush. Tell me more. That sounds so romantic, and tell me what that is. What was that like?
So Blue Water Gold Rush is a book written by Tom Kendrick, who's a former urchin and abalone diver as well from Santa Barbara, although he lives in Northern California now. He's great. I still see him from time to time when he comes down here. And if you if you know any of the old time urchin and abalone divers, a lot of which still are diving today, you can read about them in this book. And some of it is a little embellished. The divers will tell you like, oh, actually that was this person, or it was something a little bit different. But for the most part, it's a pretty accurate depiction of what that era was like when our state shifted from not understanding how valuable urchins and abalone were into this booming market that just exploded all over the world. And it was a time before regulations were as as thick as they are now. Obviously this was 50 years ago. So it felt like this Wild West type of mentality. And it's a great read, no matter how much you know about this industry or not. Definitely recommend the book. It's a page turner for sure.
Awesome. I'm going to put that in the show notes for everyone. That'll be great.
Oh yeah.
And so, okay, so you were in tech, and then fishing called your name. And for me, that really feels like it goes together so well, especially in today's world, because that's how we're able to get our messages out to people, and understanding that tech side is so freaking, what a gift to be able to have that skill, like honestly. And yeah, Ava does the Instagram account. I know for the California, or let's say
CFSB.
commercial fisherman of Santa Barbara. And then
Oh
do
my
you do
goodness.
and
Yeah.
all the Instagram accounts? Okay, so that's who we talk to. So how did
Uh,
it how did that happen then? So you go from tech to fishing, and you're fishing, and then all of a sudden you start getting involved in advocacy. What was that first advocacy point for you? Like, what was that transition like? Like, what came up? What made you want to get off of the boat and get out into the world?
Yeah, so it's funny, actually, it's the inverse of that for me in terms of timing. So when I was working in tech and I was still friends with all the fishermen and would see them sporadically, and then was offered a job with CFSB as sort of this part-time program specialist, whatever that means. I just kind of helped with random projects and some admin work. And then it started to bleed into doing a little bit more advocacy, but that advocacy for me felt like it was coming from a stale set of reality. So I decided that in order to advocate better, I should probably get my butt back on a boat and figure out what exactly it is I'm advocating for. It felt a little inauthentic to be going to meetings, taking minutes, speaking up, writing comment letters about an industry that I hadn't really tapped into in a long time, at least in terms of the actual job that I'm defending. And, I also wanted to gain the respect back of these guys as an adult, because when you're a kid, everyone adores you and gives you the respect that they'd give to any child. But as an adult, you really have to earn it. And I totally respect that. So I wanted to make sure that I had the experience that I needed to properly advocate. And so I sort of went from advocacy back more into fishing and then back more into advocacy work. So I just started crewing like shortly after working for CFSB, starting to work for CFSB. This was probably 6 months after. And then ever since then, I've just been fishing whenever I can, as much as I can. But as you can imagine, and as I'm sure you know, the level of advocacy that's required in this industry has only grown exponentially, and I don't foresee that necessarily diminishing anytime soon. So my fishing time has had to be scaled back a little bit, which I hate because that's of all my jobs, my favorite job is to be out there. So, but I see it as a temporary shift, and I don't see my ability to fish as something that's possible unless I continue to do this advocacy work. So it's a trade-off that shifts all the time, in my head at least.
Wow, that's incredible that you dedicate. I mean, you're so passionate that it truly shows up in your everyday life. And if only politicians would be that active or any, I mean, honestly, this is such a great example of get your butt out there to actually understand what's going on and the nuances of everyday life because it is so different and fisheries are so different. It depends on what you're fishing and what kind of boat and all the things that you know more than I do. And it's just, I really applaud you. I'm just like getting more and more impressed every second that we chat. So I appreciate
It'll
that.
change at some point, don't worry.
Yeah.
But thank you.
I so whenever you're advocating, because that can take on so many different forms, what have you found have been the most effective ways to advocate and why?
So I believe in-person communication is paramount in any form of advocacy. If there's a meeting, I will be there in person no matter what, unless it's really far away and they don't even offer an in-person option. But I go to Sacramento frequently, which is not fun or glamorous, but I feel that the impression is made in the most profound way when you are looking at someone, you're connecting with them. I wish that you and I were sitting in a coffee shop right now looking at each other face to face. No offense to Zoom, but just think that you can really see the shift in people's eyes when you're talking to them in person. And something else that we do, which I don't think I mentioned, is we give harbor tours. I give harbor tours pretty frequently to our local city college students, our elementary school students, things like that. And it's been really interesting to see how when you speak to people and it falls on fertile ground, you can just understand that what you're saying is really resonating with them. And that type of advocacy feels like you're not even necessarily trying to advocate because it's just like a casual setting, but it ends up those casual moments end up being pretty powerful advocacy opportunities. Other than that, I mean, I can't tell you how many letters I've written and how many comments I've submitted or said during meetings. I don't know how much of that actually sticks, but I do find that when I speak live in a meeting, versus submitting a letter, which usually we do both, I always get a pretty a pretty substantial response from the in-person comment versus just writing something. I don't know if anyone's actually reading those letters. I hope they are, but I've never gotten a response on a letter that I've submitted, and I've always been able to have some form of correspondence when it's in real time. So yeah, I guess the long and short of it is whenever possible, in-person communication is best for advocating and really letting people see the passion in your body language and in your tone. And I think that helps really land the message a little bit harder.
Yeah, such great advice. So when you're making these comments, are you reading off of something? Is it something you've already practiced and it's a speech that you could say in your sleep? Like how does that look? What does it look like to prepare for a public comment like that?
It depends on the setting. So for example, we had a Fish and Game Commission meeting this past week on Wednesday and Thursday, and on Thursday I gave comment, and I didn't really prepare anything. I knew what I was going to be talking about. I was talking about lobster tailing. And it was sort of just a casual end of the day general comment. So that was a bit more unrehearsed. But if it's something that I'm, tasked with and I feel that the fleet is relying on me to communicate in an eloquent, sophisticated way that properly represents the problem, I will write something down so specifically to where I'm even like calculating in the pauses that I'll take. I get very detail oriented with those types of things, but not always. It just depends on the context and who I'm speaking to, the level of formality, because this industry can go from being the most casual setting filled with profanity and all the crazy things, and then it can go straight into a state regulatory type of setting really quickly. So trying to balance the person that I show up as is always a little bit of a not a challenge, but it just requires some thought depending on the
Yeah.
context of where we're going.
Yeah. And so public comment, is it generally about like a 2 to 5 minute window that you have to speak?
Yeah, it also depends. So for example, in the Fish and Game Commission meetings, with every topic on the agenda, they will ask the assistant staff person who's running the Zoom stuff to tell the commission how many people are giving comment. And depending on how large that number is, that's how long you get to speak. So if there's only like 10 people, they'd say you can have 4 minutes, 3 minutes, a little bit longer. And then if sometimes there's 60 plus people and they'll say, okay, well, you only have 30 seconds, which is hard because a lot of the times if you do prepare something and you really time yourself and really want to make sure that you're getting your point across, and then they tell you you have to actually cut that in half, it's really hard. So I always try and just make a couple different versions of what I'm trying to say, just in case, because it's hard to predict. You don't know how many people are going to be in your pool of commenters until you're in the moment, at least for that type of setting. In other settings, a lot of settings, you don't even have a time constraint. So it's really more just the state and federal meetings that you see those parameters, I would say.
Wow. Okay. So you don't know how many people show up. So you're not sure how long your speech will be. But how far in advance do you know what topic they'll be discussing?
Great question. Usually it's about a week. I'm just thinking of the Fish and Game Commission meetings as an example. They don't really announce the agenda until a few days to a week before. It's never ahead enough to the point where it's really helpful. It's usually pretty last minute. Luckily, we have some connections on the commission. I know one of the coordinators for the Marine Resources Committee pretty well, and she and I will text pretty frequently, which that's a benefit of me going in person, and having FaceTime. And luckily, I have that resource to where she can give me a heads up about what's going to be discussed, even if it's, unconfirmed. She can just sort of give me a heads up and then I can better prepare myself. But without having gone and building those connections, I wouldn't be able to do that. So yeah, to answer your question, they usually don't give a lot of time to think about what they're putting out there. They usually release things pretty last minute.
Wow. Okay. So then they're releasing things last minute, and there are certain points that fishermen want you to get across. Are you taking notes throughout conversations that you're talking to these fishermen? Are you reaching out to them right before this public comment is available so you have all those notes available? I'm just trying to get a kind of a plan if someone wants to figure out how to do this for the first time, how they can prepare themselves the best. Like how would you do that?
Yeah, it's a great question. And unfortunately, the answer is super disorganized. I sort of just have this catch-all method of acquiring information. Every conversation that I have, whether it's 10 seconds or 30 minutes, if it's in passing, if it's premeditated. I just try and really take account of everything that I'm hearing to understand what the pulse is on people's opinions of certain topics. When you're fishing, you have so much time with someone to really chat with them and to understand their perspectives on things. And I usually try not to talk. Like I try to just listen as much as I possibly can when I'm working on a boat, at least. It helps me absorb the most information from people that have far more experience than I do, and I learn so much from that. Um, I also will send emails out, probing people, like if it's something really pressing and important, like for example, we have this MPA expansion nightmare going on out here, which I'm not sure if you're familiar with. Oh, I think you've posted some hilarious reels that are defensive of the industry that I've loved. So I think you are aware of those. There's these petitions that are, you know, they're kind of attempting to take away fishing grounds in a way that this has never happened before. There's never been this public petition process where anyone can just submit something and potentially take away our livelihood by means of removing fishing grounds without any science or data to back anything up, which is crazy. So in this type of extremely sensitive, extremely important topic, I will send emails out and say, like, I'm going to this meeting on this day and I will be talking about this. And I mean, I'm going in March on the 13th to the Marine Resources Committee meeting, and I've already started to probe people about things like that they really want me to press when I'm there. And then every time that happens, like I have notes in my phone. I write things on my hand all the time. Like I write things on Post-its. I put things in my computer. And unfortunately, even though that's so scattered and disorganized, this industry is scattered and disorganized. These fishermen are scattered and disorganized. So it's crazy, but it works, at least for me. And if someone was just starting out in this world of advocacy, I would say just go at it from like throwing spaghetti at the wall, like just go every single avenue that you can. And the more information, the better. Like I just am a proponent of acquiring as much information as possible on these types of advocacy issues, because the more information you have, the better decision you can make about what items you're going to bring up in the context of a meeting.
Oh, this is so great. This is relatable and it's also attainable to know that you don't have to have this perfect system because there is no such thing. So,
Yeah, exactly. You do not need a perfect system.
yeah, that's
Not at
great.
all.
I have a question about people showing up to Zoom. So, say you can't go to the meeting. Is it helpful to have people show up on Zoom that are advocates for commercial fishing, or is it mainly it's mainly us watching what's going on, or does that support mean anything in the context of the meeting?
So I wouldn't say it means anything if you're a bystander, if you're watching, because no one is that usually the Zoom is not up on a screen anywhere unless it's a more intimate type of meeting, or something that's smaller, like a Marine Resources Committee meeting or a local type of meeting, but with state officials. But in the context of a larger setting with the Fish and Game Commission or whatever a larger setting may be, there's typically no screen up. And if someone makes a comment, it just comes in from a speaker somewhere. I don't even know where, but it's just like this voice from above, which is fine. And I definitely encourage folks to participate by Zoom if that's all that they're able to do. I totally understand that. I think that, to my earlier point about being in person, if you're able to show face in person at these meetings, even though it can be boring and dry, and of course it's not at all thrilling like fishing is, but I think that when fishermen show up in these meetings, the people on the commission, the people who are running any meeting and making these important decisions that impact our world, they shift what they say. Everything changes when they know that there's a representative of the industry in the room. And that's typical of any industry, any context. If you have someone that's a constituent of a world that you potentially are impacting, you're going to act differently and you're going to speak differently. And we want that to work in our favor. So even though it's a pain and it's usually expensive, like flights to Sacramento and driving to Sacramento or wherever it is, Monterey, it's not easy, but it's worth it because people remember when you show up. And recently, as an example, I was at a meeting with Chris Voss, who is your uncle-in-law,
Yeah.
and Harry LaCornick, who's a longtime urchin diver here. He's featured in Blue Water Gold Rush. Him, Chris, and I were in Sacramento in November for the Marine Resources Committee meeting, and Harry, given his longtime history, and Chris, the people in the room that have been in that position for decades, they say, "Oh, it's so nice to see you again. I remember when you were involved in this process 30 years ago or however long it's been." And people do remember those connections. So I think that Zoom is great if it's all you can do. Definitely don't not participate just because Zoom is your only option. But if you can extend yourself into the realm of in-person participation, always do it where you can. Always.
I love that. Do people carry signs? Like, is this like a protest inside of the room, or is it more of this is a presence and then I'm going to speak? Like, what level of presence do we show up for, you know?
Great question. I would say, again, it depends on the setting. There was a meeting last August. It was held here at one of our local beach facilities for this. It was on this MPA issue, and it was hosted by the MPA Collaborative Network, which is this network that, they're advocates of expanding MPAs, which I don't think it's a noble thing that they're trying to do, but in the context of this petition process and the lack of science and how adversarial it feels, it's hard to be on their team. And I'm saying this as kindly as I can. The fishermen showed up to that meeting. There were probably 120 some plus fishermen in that room. I've never seen so many in a room in my life. They don't even come to our meetings like that. So, though it was fantastic to see them in person, they had everything just short of, pickets and signs. They were pissed. It was this feeling of disdain and hatred that was palpable. And I've never been in a room like that where I did feel like that was a form of protest in a way that typically we have to be very composed. This wasn't necessarily a regulatory type of setting, so you didn't have to be as formal. It was meant to be just sort of like a Q&A type of engaged discussion type of meeting versus like an official agenda and all these things. And so it was just a complete riot. It was crazy. I took minutes. You can see them, I think, on our website, and you can read through and feel the whiplash that existed in that room. Um, it just depends. To answer your question, it depends on the setting. It depends on the environment and the topic, because if it's something that affects the entire fleet, you will see people show up basically with, you know, the internal equivalent of pickets and signs in what
Yeah.
they're advocating.
Yeah, I'm sure people feel that on a daily basis. And people listening now are like, I'm wearing my picket on the inside always.
Yeah,
I
absolutely.
appreciate this feedback. So, in your experience, how many partners of commercial fishermen do you see at these meetings or speaking up at the meetings?
I was actually just going to mention that. I was going to say, in addition to all the fishermen that were in the room on that day, there were also a lot of wives and children and girlfriends, and I thought that was so awesome. At a certain point, you started to see them like trickle outside because I think it got too heated for anyone else to be in the room that maybe wasn't directly involved. But just last week on the calls that I was on with the commission, there were a few different wives that spoke up on Zoom, which I thought was great. And, any advocacy is good. Like if it's coming from your wife, your partner, your girlfriend, your boyfriend, whoever it is, it helps. And I can't stress that enough. I mean, one of the commissioners she almost cried on Thursday because this wife of a fisherman had her young son giving comment with her as they were giving public comment. And he's like 6 years old, and it just really moved them to have, this guy's partner and their child, and, to have the future so clearly right in front of you of someone's life, and having that world presented to you and seeing how it impacts, seeing how what you're doing impacts them, that really helped get the message across. So I think if anything, hearing from partners and any supporters of the fishermen is a super powerful thing, if not more powerful than the fishermen speaking themselves, because it goes beyond this notion that fishermen are selfish. It's like they're supporting people. It's not just them, so it helps, affirm that piece of the provider element, I think, a little bit more.
Wow, I just got goosebumps thinking about that. That's so powerful.
I
Do
can
you
say.
feel that, I mean, that example shows that having a personal story or showing them is can be really effective. Do you feel that sometimes if people are talking about their personal story, that maybe that is derailing the point of what they're trying to do? For example, we could talk about how it's impacting our lives all day. Is that really affecting them, or they want to, or should we show data points? Like, what would be the most helpful way? Because part of it is, yeah, that's great, but like, go get another job. I mean, that's how some people think. You know what I mean? And it's not fair. And I know it pisses me off to even think about that, but that's how some people think because they're not concerned about commercial fishermen. They don't really concerned about the fisheries as much as we are, obviously. So I'm wondering, do you feel that bringing in data or bringing in data points would be more helpful if we're able to entwine that with our personal stories instead of kind of crying up there? Because I know that's what we feel like doing, is like, what are you doing to us? So
Yeah,
I'm just wondering if the crying is helpful or if there's a better way to get our message out there. And yeah, if we all had 6-year-old cute kids, that might be helpful. I don't have one. So I'm
for
just thinking
sure.
like, do I cry? Do I, have this beautiful soliloquy and give data points? Like, what do you feel has been the most effective way to get these messages across?
Yeah, great point. We do not all have a child to use as leverage for getting our point across. Um, I think exactly like you said, intertwining the two. I think I'm always a fan of speaking from the heart, no matter how corny it is. Like I won't necessarily do that in a public comment, in a live public comment. But in written letters, I will always bring up a component that has a story because people remember a story more than they do remember the data. But of course, data is what helps enable the decision making process on a more official level. So I try and just present both, and I try and start with data points typically. Like if I'm writing a letter, I will always start out with, foundational information about if it's a personal letter, I'll start out with foundational information about me and then the organizations I work for, the science that backs up the point I'm trying to prove, and then I'll tell a story that is relatable to how all of that ties together. And I'm very privileged that I have this amazing bank of stories, from my childhood and from my adulthood now. And not everyone might have that. So I guess I would encourage people to go and make memories so that you have these experiences to speak from, because that's really what compels people to see your side. At least that's been what I've experienced. But of course, that piece of the data and the science, that's super important too, because if you're just speaking, all unicorns and rainbows about something that's fluffy, that's great, but it's not gonna that will be fleeting. And if you back it up, if you have all of these great points laid out, and then you have this piece that appeals to someone's emotions, at the end, it really just drives it home. At least that's what I've learned in my experience. So it's a mix of
Yeah.
both.
Okay. I love that. And then we can move on in a second, but I just want to ask, I want to get all the details.
Ah,
So
okay.
so when you're writing a letter, how long is this letter? Like what is a good length? Is it 1 page? Is it 15 pages? Like what's a good size letter, do you think?
Great question. I would say keep it as short as you can, unless it is a really complex issue. This MPA expansion issue, the letters that we submitted for all the organizations I work for were long, probably five-ish, 5+ pages, maybe 10 plus for one of the organizations. And we brought on attorneys to help with just proofreading and wordsmithing certain things because it is such a complex, touchy issue. Um, with issues that are smaller, maybe smaller scale, not necessarily smaller in importance, but those typically are a page to 2 pages, probably no more than 2.5 pages. Whenever I've written a personal letter, I don't think I've done more than 3 pages. And I think that the more concise you can be, the better, but don't leave anything out that really is important just because you're trying to keep it short to a certain page limit. The longer you have your letter, the more the person is going to roll their eyes when they have to open it and read it. So just you want to make it appealing for that person to read your letter and to remember it. And it's just like any persuasive writing pretty much that you have to do that we learned in junior high. You have to go back into your mental floppy disk and pull out those skills from that time because it really is it's the same type of style. And we have smaller issues like we have SpaceX up here, which I'm not sure if you're familiar with, but we're doing a lot of advocacy work because they're trying to increase their launches, and that's going to shut down fishing grounds. It also shuts down beach access to Alama Beach, which is a really amazing, important public beach. Anyway, the letters that we wrote for that were like no more than 2 pages because it's a really simple problem. Like, please don't expand the amount of launches. This is why, this is who we are. And like, that's pretty much it. It's like cut and dry. So when you have things that are really just nebulous and you have like things going in a million different directions, which is what the MPA nightmare is, you really have to present a lot of facts and a lot of science to back up every one of your points. And that requires a lot more pages. So yeah, it just depends. But I would say try and keep it as short as you can without sacrificing the important points that you're trying to make, which is an annoying answer because of course shorter is better, simpler is better, but it's hard to simplify usually. Simplifying isn't an easy thing to do. So try to simplify where you can, I would say is best.
Yeah, no, that's fair. That's great. That's a great answer. And here I'm going into another detail. When you're writing a letter, is it important to get that letter to whoever it is before the public comment or by the public comment, or can you send it at any point and it would still be, quote unquote effective to the best of its ability?
Great question. There are deadlines typically for any public comment period. I've never seen a public comment period that was rolling. Um, so you have to be really aware of what those deadlines are. There are staggered deadlines for certain types of meetings. Like for example, with the Fish and Game Commission, there's a date that if you submit that letter by, the commission will have time to read it ahead of time. And then there's a date after that where you can submit by that date, and that means that they will have the letter the day of, not ahead of time. And then there's a date where you can submit where they'll have the letter after the meeting. So there's this weird tiered system for a lot of those types of state agency meetings. But for the most part, it's usually just one hard date. But there are some weird nuanced systems. I'm always a proponent of getting it in as early as possible, just so that they have the most time to review. However, that's not always realistic just in this world. Sometimes we're not even made aware of an issue until the day before that final deadline, in which case you just submit what you can and you want to hope that it makes it through so that they see that you and your organization did submit, even if it's last minute. That's better than nothing. But when allowed or when appropriate, I definitely would recommend submitting as early as possible, just so you feel like you can feel safe about the letter that you submitted being read ahead of time.
This is so helpful. I'm asking these questions not only for me, but there's a woman in our private chat who wants to get involved and she just doesn't know how to get started advocating for her husband's fishery. And like many POCFs, there's many of us who don't live at our fisherman's port. So we're kind of feeling that we're disconnected, but we're highly connected because our partner's out on the ocean. So this specific person, she lives in Florida and her fisherman is in New Jersey fishing. And so she wants to help and advocate for those fisheries. Where does she go to find out where these public comments are being held? Like, what do you Google? How do you find out about this?
Yeah, wow. My heart goes out to her. I mean, just like you. I don't know how you do that level of of distance, but I think that it is beautiful and so admirable to do that across different states. I think that what she should do if he's a New Jersey fisherman, I'm not sure what the problems are that she's advocating against, but she should definitely Google New Jersey commercial fishing regulatory commission meetings and figure out what their fish and game, because every state has a fish and game commission. So I'm sure that that schedule is posted online. The timing might be super different than what we do in California, but she can definitely find that information out, hopefully by just Googling something along those lines, like commercial fishing regulations, Fish and Game Commission, start there, or whatever the issue may be. I don't know if it's offshore wind or if it's like whale entanglement or whatever it may be. If you just type in those keywords, It can be really helpful to just do some high level research. And then what I always find is helpful is that if you're reading an article about a topic that you want to advocate for and someone is interviewed or someone who wrote it is an important piece of the problem, I will add them on LinkedIn, which is creepy, but I will add them and send them a message that says like, hey, I read this article and I'd really love to just chat with you for a few minutes if you don't mind, so I can learn a bit more. I haven't had to do that a lot lately, but when I was first starting out, I did that all the time. And people were really receptive to it because, as you can imagine, in the world of commercial fishing advocacy, people are happy to talk about the issues that they care about so much. I wouldn't be here. I mean, I would because I actually really enjoy your company, but I wouldn't be here just like spewing all this information if it was all for a job in an industry that I didn't care about. So, if I were on the other end of someone reaching out to me and it was a situation like this partner, I would have no problem talking to them. Maybe I'm wrong, but I think that it's worth trying, at least for someone in her position. I think it's worth trying.
I love that. Thank you so much for those details. I appreciate that. And I do want to plug in the private chat. This is how we communicate with each other. We're from all over Canada, the US, we're international. And anytime someone has a question, we do our best to reach out and get the answers. So that's the kind of support on top of course, emotional support. We're, of course, there for that. But it's so interesting, too, to learn that there's women in our chat who are part of fishermen's wives groups, and they want to be in the chat so they can learn how other fishermen's wives and POCFs are able to help support their fisheries. So it's really this beautiful cycle of support and also education, constantly learning about things and bringing in new information. So if anybody's interested, the links below in the show notes. We'd love to have you. So thank you so much, Ava. And I'm going to switch over to a different topic about what's been really big in our community, and it actually has been big with me in the past, is I want to know about your experience with fishermen's wives and girlfriends, maybe not feeling comfortable with you on board. And I say this because I have a story, personal story, and also I get letters about this still to this day, especially around Bristol Bay sockeye salmon season in the summertime. And for example, Chris said he was looking for a deckhand one year. I think it was his second year in, maybe it was his first year. Anyway, he was looking for a deckhand. I was like, cool. He had 3 people that he could possibly hire, and one was a woman. And I was like, okay, cool. Didn't think anything of it. And then he said, I think I'm going to go with Emily. And then like started to spiral. My insecurities about my relationship came to the surface, and obviously nothing to do with this a wonderful woman. But it got to the point where I said, if you fall in love with her, I release you. I mean, it was so freaking dramatic, but that's how bad it was for me. I was like, oh my God, they're going to fall in love. And then this is it. This is the end of our relationship. And then I've had fishermen that I've spoken with at the Pacific Marine Expo that have come up to me and said, my wife actually, I've had to turn women away because my wife has an issue with female deckhands aboard. And I'm like, man. And the thing was that Emily, she ended up working with Chris. She taught me so much about my own insecurity myself, because she couldn't have been more amazing. And also really made me understand and empathize with female fishermen. And I can't even imagine what they go through, just having to be on a boat with a dude you don't know all day, and then like working your ass off and probably having, to prove yourself on that stage as well. And so wondering if you have ever had any kind of feedback from partners of fishermen or anything like that.
This is such an interesting topic, and I really don't ever get to talk about it because, as you can imagine, 99.9% of my coworkers are guys. So, and my girlfriends don't, they don't really understand, because it's such a specific issue. So my first boss, my first captain that I worked for as an adult when I ventured back into fishing, is 79 years old, and I've known him since I was born. He is truly like a grandfather to me. So just that alone was not an issue, because he doesn't even have a partner or anything. It was very much just like a paternal type of relationship. When I started working for this guy named Matt, who he is like 35, and I started crabbing with him and doing lobster with him, with that other guy who's 79 years old. We worked together, all three of us for a little while. And then I started to work just for Matt. And the reason I felt comfortable, and I think why he felt comfortable taking me on, is because I know his wife. I used to work with her in the tech industry, ironically, which was such a crazy connection and coincidence. And I also worked with his sister. So I know his family so well, and I don't think that there was ever any concern on Natasha's part, on the wife's part, because we've just known each other for so long. And I see them as like this extended family that I really care about and their kids. So with that context, there really wasn't an issue, at least as far as I know. With other boats that I've worked on, I have never gotten any kind of pushback about being a woman and having the job. I have been denied jobs because I'm a woman and because, and it's funny, it doesn't even come from the wife or the partner. Like the fisherman will tell me, like, I would take you on, but I have too much respect for my wife. And I'm like, okay, does that mean that you didn't even ask her? Or, like it just, usually it feels like the guy is more afraid of the problem that will cause with their wife or their partner, which I respect that too, and that's okay. I think where it becomes frustrating, I've been told flat out explicitly that if you were ugly, I would hire you. And I think that even though that's really harsh and crazy, I do appreciate the honesty. Like that's one thing that fishermen, they don't beat around the bush. They'll tell you straight up, like, I'm not hiring you because this is the issue or whatever it is. And that's hurtful because there's nothing you can do about the way you were born. And I don't know how to fix that kind of problem. And it's unfortunate that I'm denied those opportunities, but that's just kind of the way the industry is because it's this antiquated mindset of filled with guys that are typically of an older age. Like the average age of a fisherman in our harbor is 52, and I don't see that number going down anytime soon. So the way that they think about things is just a bit more traditional. Um, and then other guys that I've fished for are my good friends. So guys that are my age or younger. Oh, it says your internet is unstable. Can you hear me?
Yep,
Shoot.
I
Oh,
can hear you.
good.
Yep, you're good.
Okay, sorry.
No, you're good. This is commercial
Anyway, it,
fishing. We're
it
talking
hasn't been
commercial
an
fishing.
issue. Okay. Yeah, you kind of froze for a second.
Okay.
I see you now though. Okay, we're good.
Okay. Yeah.
Um, you mentioned something about having to prove yourself, which is absolutely true, especially when I was first starting out. I mean, you want to work twice as hard. I wanted to be twice as strong. I wanted to all I can do is show up and be positive and work hard to the best of my ability. I'm not able to lift things as well or as throw things as high or whatever it is as some of the other guys, but what I lack in physical strength because I'm a woman, I feel that I make up for in the fact that I don't do drugs. I don't ever drink on the boat. I'm never late, things that you can make up for if you don't have the brawn element. I try and just really extend myself into those realms where I can, bringing food, anything I can do to help make my um my presence as a crew member better in lieu of having maybe the same level of strength. I try and always do. But yeah, it's a really if it were me and my boyfriend were like if the roles were switched, I would feel totally insecure too. If it's any consolation, I and I'm sure I speak for all women who are commercial fishermen, I never look as ugly or as smell as bad as I do as when I'm on the job. And like there's something about seeing the guy that you're working for that even if they are objectively attractive, at least based on what I've seen working for guys, like what you see when you work with someone that intimately in the setting of fishing, there is nothing about what each of you are doing and the way that you're sleeping, like in the bunks. Oh my God, I've had feet in my face and like farts and burps and like, oh my God, just it's not an environment that's like it's not this like room with rose petals and any kind of environment that's conducive to an affair, or anything like that. It's so exhausting. I, like even if I worked with my boyfriend, at the end of the day, I would go to sleep and I would say, "Don't touch me." I would say, "Get away from because it's just so tiring. Like you just don't want to, I don't want to do anything except sleep at the end of the day. I don't look at my phone. I don't even really read anymore. I just knock myself out. So I think that that's also been an important thing to stress to anyone who might have concerns is like the environment in which this work is taking place. It might seem like it's promiscuous, but it's not at all. You're constantly working and then you pass out. So
Yeah.
that's
That's so reassuring. I love that. There's actually a partner who fishes with her husband up in Bristol Bay who mentioned that. She's like, honestly, there's just no freaking energy or time for that.
yeah.
No one. That's so funny. I
Yeah,
think what really like, okay, this is what triggered me when Chris said that he was gonna have a female. I was like, okay, I'm strong woman. And so then I talked to my boss publisher at the time. I was editor at a local paper in Santa Barbara. And I said, yeah, so Chris hired a female deckhand. He's like, that's a problem. You should be worried. I was like, are you freaking kidding me? He said, yeah,
oh,
there's going to be an intimacy there, whether it's actual intimacy, but there's time together that you're not going to have. And I'm like, why are you doing this to me right now? And then right after that, I had to go pick up Chris and Emily because they needed a ride. They took the boat from, I think they launched the boat, or no, they stacked the traps at the Santa Barbara harbor, and so then they were bringing the boat back to Channel Islands harbor. So they didn't have a car. So I went to go pick them up. And so I get on the boat and I see both of their sleeping bags on the bunk. And that's what triggered me because my freaking boss, dude, was like, you have something to worry about. And then I see like the sleeping arrangements. And then I'm driving home, like driving them back. And I'm like, everything's fine. And then that's what I gave him my speech, like my Shakespeare. I release you. You know what I mean? And he just looks at me like, what are you talking about? Like, what are you doing? Like insecurity out the yin yang. So anyway, I learned a lot. Emily could has just taught me so much. And then it's funny because Ava and I have only communicated through Instagram DMs up until this point, maybe an email now just to make sure that we had our Zoom interview. And Ava was going to fish for Chris at one point this season. It was, I think, in January, maybe or something. You're going to hop on one day. And I was like, oh, cool. So I was thinking then I was like, oh, good thing I'm not insecure anymore. And like, yeah, cool. Ava seems really cool. I'm glad that you're going to be able to work together. And then as soon as we get up on the Zoom, I was like, oh shit, Ava's really high. Like I'm really glad I'm secure now.
God, that
No,
is
but I mean, it was like my levels of how secure am I as a woman? It's like just, the woman in the relationship. But anyway, I had to say that because it's funny. And also to your point of the fisherman being like, you're not ugly, so I can't hire you. It's like, that's a shame. Like, that's such a shame that that's how we judge each other because it's just like reflections of our own insecurities, you know?
like, okay, first of all, thank you for saying that you think that I look nice right now, because that is truly a stretch. Yeah, the when that guy said that to me, I was not surprised because he said, I guarantee you a lot of guys have thought this, but they won't say it to your face. I'll tell you to your face. And it actually helped me sort of eliminate other potential options of people that I could kind of tell were maybe wanting to say that but didn't. And like that's fine. The thing that I've realized with time is I get more out of this industry and out of that job of fishing. What I care more about what I get out of it than their opinion.
Because you're fishing and you're doing all these things. How do you decompress after a tough, maybe a comment session or after a meeting or even after a fishing day? How do you get get back to your center of Ava to be like, all right, here I am, a baseline. Now I can go back to absorbing information or maybe not, and just being able to just reset. How do you do that?
Yeah, I don't really think about this that often, but it's a really important question, which I think a lot of us are guilty of not thinking about enough, which hopefully is changing in our world today. But ironically, fishing is what centers me and decompresses me the most, even though it's the most physically laborious job in my realm of responsibilities. Because when I'm advocating, or if I'm on Zooms all day, or if I'm, taking minutes, or I'm corresponding with people, really important people, the level of exhaustion that I feel after that, it almost brings on this anxiety because I'm not sure what the follow-up will be, or I'm not sure if I said the right thing. And even if I felt confident in the moment, like I'll overthink it later. But when your body is so physically tired, and it forces you to just pass out. That does something for me in terms of decompression that I can't get anywhere else. Like I could go to the gym for 4 hours and I'd probably be on my phone working the whole time or doing something that's not what I'm supposed to be there doing. Like when you're fishing, there is no choice but to do what's in front of you. Like even in downtime, there's always something to be done. You can always be cleaning something, you can always be organizing something. Like you should always be working. And I like that about it. I have ADHD and I'm really, really thankful for what fishing does with that for me because working with my hands, being present, it really just helps recenter me and it releases stress because I do not have the capacity to think about anything else other than what's going on right in front of me. And you see it all the time, what happens in these tragic accidents or horrible mistakes that happen if you just lose sight of what you're doing for 2 seconds. You can't do that. You can't stray. And that to me, like jumping back into that world of work, that style of work was totally foreign because I think, like I told you, I worked in tech for a while where you're working on 20 different things at once and you're being pulled in a million directions and there's Zooms and there's Teams meetings and then you're going into these pods for, I mean, it's like a completely different universe. And it's so out of touch of what our species is supposed to do. Like when I'm on the boat, I feel like it's truly the work that we were meant to do. I know that sounds cheesy, but it's what decompresses me. So that's kind of a really pathetic answer, but I don't get anything out of like massages. I don't do meditation. I've tried. I'm really bad at it. I've tried a lot actually to do meditation and I'm really bad at it because I just think about all the things I need to do. So what I've learned that works best for me in terms of resetting is doing something that I feel like I'm applying myself and I'm doing something valuable, but I also am really present. And fishing, luckily, happens to provide that. So that's what works for me. I don't know if I could say that about the other guys, but they also fish a lot harder than I do. So for me, at the level where I'm at, it might be different, but that's my silly, pathetic answer.
No, I think that's such a great answer. And I feel like there's so many fishermen that could totally agree with that and understand that. That's why they love fishing in the first place, is being outside. It's not being behind a desk, it's nature and, going out to the boat or no, not to the boatyard, going out to the fishing grounds, that travel out there. That's like a whole little road trip of your own, just like as you know more than I do, but Chris will send me his pictures of the sunrise going out to the fishing grounds and I love it. And it just makes me feel so much more connected to him. And I'm thinking, man, he gets to have this beautiful drive every day, this ocean. Like, how nice is that? Even though he's tired and it's cold or whatever, it's like, no, but he still knows. He's like, I'm going to the Channel Islands. Like, I don't not look around and think this is effing amazing. I'm stoked that I get to fish here. It is just such a beautiful piece of the planet to be a part of. And
Yeah.
yeah, it's nice to be able to share those moments with them through the phone, because I feel like as fishermen or partners of commercial fishermen, we still have a tie to the ocean, whether we're near our partners' ports or not, because of these images and these stories that we get for them. And the essence of the ocean is rippled through us as well. And so we are kind of byproducts of being able to enjoy it that way. And so it's such a special lifestyle that we get to share. And then the best part is, tying it to advocacy, is that we're able to share our stories and our lifestyles, not only in a public comment arena, but also with friends and family who don't really understand commercial fishing. And maybe if we explain to them, oh, this is what my partner does, and this is what they catch, and oh, here's a picture of the boat, and this is what the traps are, the nets or whatever, it gives them a better sense of why they would want to buy a seafood item that says wild caught, like why they would want to read the label closer, because they know that somebody that they know catches the seafood. Like, it's personifying it in a way and it's making them connected. So really, we are also important in the industry, no matter what position we hold, children, the wives, the friends of, the family of, I mean, we're all advocating just by literally existing and sharing our hearts. And I truly appreciate you sharing your heart with us today, because I am so just in awe of you. And I just, like I said before, I'm like Ava for president. Like, who is on board? Let's go.
That is
Let's do this. Like, I wouldn't wish that on you, but I wish that for us all. You know what I'm saying? So, like,
so
thank you for that and for your time. And I know you're so busy, and I'd love to know what is currently top of mind for you right now. What are you currently working on that you would like maybe more support in, or you would like to share?
So right now, I am spending a lot of time on MPA expansion, opposition, advocacy. We have this really important Marine Resources Committee meeting next month, which I mentioned earlier on the 13th. So I'll be in Sacramento for that. And just making sure that we really don't have any missteps as we navigate this tricky process is so important, and it's new. Like this, our state has never taken on this process before, so we're part of, and that's the interesting piece, is I do feel like we are part of this dialogue that's really interesting and important and current and historical. These types of things that happen, people will be reading about for years based on what precedent is set at these upcoming meetings. So that's super front of mind. I've been auditing letters from our fleet. Different fishermen have been sending me letters that they want me to look over like almost every day, which I'm honored that they would even think that I, bring value to reading their letters, because I really do love reading what they have to say. They come from such a different angle. Having a college education is a wonderful thing, but it's not a necessary thing to get a point across in a letter, which a lot of them I think feel insecure about. And I always just try and like diminish that, because I don't think that having a degree makes you any less compelling of a writer than someone who doesn't have one. Whatever. That's a different topic.
How about that interview? Does she not bring it, or what? Seriously, it's like we got into the nitty gritty on how to advocate. And also, one of my favorite parts of the conversation was talking about being a female fisherman and what that must be like for them. And can we all have that sense of compassion and empathy of what female fishermen must deal with on any kind of level, and who knows what that is. And we can get into that on another interview. But I feel that, as I mentioned in the interview, one of the pain points that we have as partners of commercial fishermen is the trust in our relationship. And it really is a form of the insecurities that we have inside, because I've lived it. I totally understand. And so I love hearing from female fishermen, to hear what their perspective is, so we can get a better sense of what they're going through, how we can be more empathetic, and how we can be more trusting in our partners and send those loving, positive vibes to female fishermen, because they are just doing the best they can and they are working their butts off. And as partners, as women, let's support other women always, right? It's never about them. It's always about how we feel about ourselves inside. Yeah. Like I said, we go deep here. We don't mess around. It gets emotional. We get to talk about the government, advocacy. Woo, let me just stretch for a second. But anyway, thanks so much for being here today. I'm posting the rest of Ava's interview about writing grants and how she goes about that, and for next month, because it is just such a whole other incredible conversation that I want to bring into our topic of finances, because I know that's another huge pain point in our industry. And so I have a whole slew of amazing podcasts coming up for you regarding finances. But for now, advocacy piece, I hope this has been super helpful for you. Thanks so much for listening, and we'll see you next week. Thank you so much for listening. To support our community, I'd so appreciate it if you'd tap the subscribe button to this podcast or write a review. And if you're a POCF who wants to connect further, go to POCFpride.com for weekly vlogs and to learn about opportunities to join our private communities. We'd love to have you.